very happy to have you here today at Karlsruhe International University. We are going to have a conversation about inclusive communication in teams. So, Lila, would you like to present you first?
Sure. My name is Lila Sachs dos Santos Gomez, a very long name. I'm from the United States originally. I've lived for 25 years in Germany. I originally studied anthropology with a focus on Brazil. So I studied in Heidelberg in Brazil and in the UK. My degree is in what is called International Studies of Childhood and Youth, which is basically the anthropology of education. So how do people in different cultures see childhood and youth? What are the educational practices that they have? And after that, I spent a lot of time working in different areas. I worked in different municipalities. I also worked in the NGO sector. In 2019, I then founded my own company, Yarrow Global Consulting, and we focus on supporting especially what we call public policy or practical or participative public policy formation. So how can we support municipalities, private institutions, and also the general public in creating more inclusive public policy, including also education systems.
Oh, that sounds very interesting. Now, today, if you want to talk about teamwork, my first question would be to understand a bit more which are the most common barriers in within teams.
Well, I think the most important thing, first of all, is that even though we look at barriers within teams, different studies have shown that more diverse teams are actually much more innovative. They're much more sustainable. They're able to approach the complex challenges that we have in today's society in a much different way because they bring together different perspectives. So even though sometimes we focus on what are the difficulties that we have, in fact, we should be and we have to be looking at how to create inclusive frameworks for intercultural teams or diverse teams because our society is becoming more and more diverse, and I think that we need to really focus on what are the advantages of it. But of course it's difficult. You have many different barriers in diverse teams. You have language barriers, you have cultural barriers, and you have barriers. There are different studies that show that people have different concepts, for example, of time, of how to organize time, different concepts of efficiency, different concepts of communication, not only language communication, but also bodily communication. And one of the concepts that I like to use the most is the idea of linear and circular time. So this is a way that we can look at different barriers within teams, and this is just one aspect of it that I think a lot of people can really relate to. So for example, I'm married to a Brazilian, and we also work together in different projects, and he has a very circular concept of time. So this means that time for him is not something that can be divided into nice little blocks, and then when we finish with one block we start with the next, but basically you work on something until it's finished, and this could take an hour, this might take 2 hours, but this really supports, for example, friendships or sort of collegial communication and cooperation within teams. And when he moved to Germany, it was very difficult for him because in Germany there's a very strong linear concept of time, which means basically if we plan to do something for 60 minutes, after 60 minutes, no matter where we are in the project, we stop and we start with the next concept. And this can be understood by people as being more efficient, sort of for people who have a linear concept of time, but for people who come from a more circular concept of time, this might be seen as being rude, because they are like, okay, we're just building on our relationships, and so why are we stopping the conversation now? And so I think that if we talk about barriers, you really have to think about what are the people's concepts of time, what are the concepts of communication, formal, informal communication, and also body language that people use. I think are three things that we really need to think about when we're talking about barriers in diverse teams.
Would you think there are specific barriers that we need to address in teams of students? Because this course is for students from universities.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that students will be bringing different, the question is, where are they coming from? What are the skills that they're bringing with them? Are these skills that are, for example, recognized in formal education systems, or are they bringing informal skills with them? And also if you're working more with a more diverse body of students, then you'll be dealing with different ideas, concepts of gender, you'll be dealing with different ideas and concepts of what education services need to offer. You'll probably have students that will be coming from different age spectrums. People might be bringing professional education with them, or non-professional education with them. And so I think that on the one hand, you'll need to be looking at how can students in the student body, how can they deal with different forms of diversity and use that type of diversity to be able to enhance their educational experience.
But what can do the students themselves to create a more inclusive communication when they work in teams?
Well, I think if you look, we had talked previously about mitigating barriers. So how can you or mitigating bias? And I think that the main way, and this counts for students, but of anybody who's dealing with different biases, it's basically we have these 3 steps that you look at when you're talking about mitigating biases. One of them is, first of all, to recognize your own biases. So what are the types of stereotypes that I might bring myself into any lived experience that I have? And that has to do with the socialization that I've had, the way that I was raised, perhaps the culture that I was raised in, or experiences that I've had that I draw on when I deal with other people. So how can I be more recognize and become more aware of my own biases and what I am bringing into an experience with another person? And then the second step is to create empathy, or to try and have a shift of perception. So what is it that we take a lot of things for granted? Somebody might act in a certain way that we think is, for example, rude or doesn't fit to the situation, but to put yourself into the other person's perspective and say, why might they be acting that way? What could be reasons? There is good reasons for people to act in certain ways, to have that change of perspectives. But then also creating safe spaces in which people can either talk to each other or talk about own experiences. I think those are the 3 steps that students can really use in order to mitigate biases. Well, a safe space is a pretty large term. Mostly it's used you have different concepts of safe spaces. The concept that is mostly used is where I have access to a physical space. This could be an online space or an offline space in which I can interact with people who may have experienced same things that I have. This might have been, for example, racism or discrimination because of disabilities, physical or mental disabilities. This might
Thank you for the explanation. I would like to come back to now the setting of a team. In a team, usually there are different roles, or sometimes at least you distribute different roles. Mm-hmm. The role of a leader and the role of the other members. Is it important to have different roles in an inclusive team, and which different responsibilities would have each of these members?
I don't know if it's different to... I think roles are something that you can distribute actively or consciously. I think the main thing is that to really reflect on the roles that may have consciously or mostly unconsciously be distributed. So somebody might have a role of a leader, to really reflect, is that person really fitting to that role? Is this the role that they want to have? Is this the role that they feel comfortable with? Has this role changed over the period of a project or similar? To really have that reflective, quite often when we work in teams, and especially if we're working on teams in a certain project, people will come into a certain role consciously or unconsciously and then be stuck with that role for the rest of the project. And that might not help the person, but it also might not help the project. So I think it's really important to have every once in a while, maybe once a month or once every 6 weeks, to go to a meta level, to go to a reflective level and to look at the project and not only look at the operational part of it, but to really take the time to look and be like, is everybody really comfortable in the roles that they're in? Is this still working for the project? Where is there, or maybe we might have different, are we stagnating at some point, and so on and so forth. One of the things that's, people tend to take very little time when they start a project, for example. So let's talk about project teams that are built in projects, and this might be, I don't know, you're doing a group project together, you're writing an essay together, or you're creating a presentation together. Quite often we tend to sort of, okay, we have the task at hand and we're just going to start doing it, and people tend to take very little time to think about like sort of a strategic approach to any sort of project. And maybe there's somebody who we say, okay, we want somebody to be a critical thinker, they're going to get, and you can even print out a card on a piece of paper. You can have different colored cards, and you say to this person, for example, for the course of the project, you're going to be the critical thinker. You're going to every time raise your blue card and be like, okay, I want to, I'm actively being the critical thinker here and sort of questioning what we're doing. So you can have, you can have something like a critical thinker, you can have a timekeeper, you can have the clown, humor, somebody who's responsible for, making sure that everybody's still having fun, or not taking themselves too seriously. Then you can have the leader, you can have I think a really important role is somebody who's like responsible for protocoling things. And if you actively think about those roles before you start a project, then that can help you in the course of the project also to think about, okay, what roles are missing, what roles might we need. And you can have that for the course of a project.